Linda Schwartz was about to bake an apple pie when she discovered she was out of sugar. Annoying, but not critical. In neighborhoods like Oakwood Heights, neighbors always help out with little things. She threw on a light jacket. It was a crisp April morning in Ohio, and headed across the street to the Thompson house. No one answered the first bell. Linda pressed the button again, longer, and listened. The house was quiet, too quiet for a Monday morning. Maybe Sarah was on duty? Strangely, Mike's car was parked in the driveway. Usually by this time he'd left for the auto shop. She knocked on the window to no avail. Something told her to check the back door. Years as a school nurse had taught Linda to trust her intuition. The door was ajar, unusual for the careful and cautious Sarah. Sarah? Mike? It's Linda. I'm sorry to intrude, but, The words stuck in her throat when she saw Sarah's shoes lying haphazardly by the stairs. Sarah never left her shoes anywhere. Never. Linda walked slowly up the stairs, clinging to the banister as if they could protect her from what waited upstairs. In the bedroom, she saw Sarah lying on the bed in a strange pose. The red color on the white pillow seemed almost unnatural, like accidentally spilled wine. But Linda knew it wasn't wine. 20 minutes later, the quiet street turned into a scene from a TV show. Police cars, yellow tape, neighbors in bathrobes and house slippers watching avidly from behind hastily drawn curtains. Detective John Miller, one of the first to arrive, glanced around the room, making mental notes. A neatly made bed with a body on it, no sign of struggle. A single gunshot to the head, apparently fired at close range. Victim was wearing home clothes. On the bedside table, a cell phone, a book and a glass of water. Just a normal bedroom of a normal family, except for the dead woman. "Miller, we need to take a look," Officer Perkins called to him from the next room. "Looks like they found a weapon in the trash can in the bathroom." Miller sighed. A gun in a trash can almost certainly meant an attempt to cover up a crime, not a suicide. His gaze stopped on a photograph on the wall, a smiling man and woman against a lake. He looked at the body, then back at the photograph. Now he had to figure out what had happened between those two moments. The happy day by the lake and this morning's death. 4 months ago, Sarah Thompson hummed along to the radio as she cooked dinner. She loved these moments of silence, when she could just be herself without putting on the usual mask of caring nurse or helpful wife 32 years old. And sometimes she felt 50, especially after her heavy shifts in the intensive care unit of the city hospital. The front door slammed, heralding Mike's arrival. As usual, he smelled of machine oil and cigarettes after working in the machine shop. As usual, he headed straight for the shower without saying a word. As usual, Sarah felt her shoulders tense at his appearance. It had once been different. She remembered the first time she'd seen him at the town fair 6 years ago. Tall, with a careless smile, and hands that seemed to be able to fix anything. Those hands had seemed trustworthy to her then, a symbol of protection, of confidence, of the future she so desperately wanted to build after 3 years of loneliness and working herself to death. Now, at the sight of those same hands, she sometimes felt only fear. Mike stepped out of the shower and sat down at the table. Lately, their dinners had been held in silence. He ate while staring at his phone, occasionally snickering at news or messages from friends. Sarah studied him furtively, the dark circles under his eyes, the wrinkle between his eyebrows, his shoulders a little slouchier than before. 35 years old, but he looked 45. Hard work or something else? "Are you working tomorrow?" he asked, not looking up from the phone. "Yeah, double shift. I'm filling in for Judy." She noticed his jaw twitch. She didn't need to explain what that meant. In recent months, every extra shift had been a cause for suspicion. "Again?" His voice was filled with ill-concealed irritation. "You've already picked up 3 extra shifts this month." "We need the money, Mike," Sarah said quietly. "After you've been out of work for 4 months. Oh, so now it's my fault? Here we go. Here we go again. It's like a broken record." Mike's frustrated with his inability to be the sole breadwinner. Sarah's tired of having to make excuses for her work. He feels his failure as a man. She feels suffocated. The evening ended as usual, a cold truce, each in their own corner of the house. Mike was in the garage fiddling with a used Ford he'd bought at auction, hoping to resell. Sarah was in the bedroom reading a book, trying not to think about tomorrow, about the patients who expected her to be competent and compassionate, about the husband who seemed to expect nothing from her anymore. Oakwood Heights was a typical American suburb with its own written and unwritten rules. Mowed lawns, barbecues on the weekends, smiles and greetings when they met, no matter what was going on behind closed doors. Sarah had learned to play by those rules. Every morning she left the house with a glued-on smile, usually about 15 minutes after Mike left. She would get into her used Honda Civic and drive to the hospital 20 minutes away. There she would change into a medical uniform, a kind of armor that allowed her to be the Sarah she wanted to be, confident, needed, irreplaceable. She was respected at the hospital. Dr. Reeves always consulted with her about the condition of patients, especially the elderly. "You've got a diamond in the rough, Thompson," he'd say. And at times like this, Sarah felt that everything was not in vain. That somewhere deep inside there was still that girl who dreamed of becoming a doctor, but stopped halfway because of her father's death and the need to work to help her mother. Amy Parker, who worked in the same department, was the only person Sarah could be honest with. They had met back in medical school and had maintained a friendship ever since, despite all the ups and downs. Amy was the complete opposite of Sarah. Loud, eccentric, with bright red hair and a habit of saying what she thought regardless of the consequences. "You look lousy," Amy declared when she met Sarah in the break room mid-afternoon. "And don't tell me it's just fatigue. I know you too well." Sarah shrugged, focusing on her coffee. "Ordinary day, ordinary problems. Nothing new to report." Amy leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Mike again?" Sarah involuntarily rubbed her wrist, a gesture that didn't escape her friend's scrutinizing gaze. "Show me your hand," Amy demanded. "Now." Reluctantly, Sarah rolled up her sleeve, exposing the bruise, yellowing but still visible. "It's not what you think," she explained hastily. "I hit the door jamb when I—" "Stop it," she said sharply. "Stop it," Amy cut her off abruptly. "Don't do that. Don't make excuses for him." Sarah lowered her eyes. She didn't know why she kept defending Mike. Maybe it was the memories of the good times. Maybe out of fear of being alone. Maybe it was deep-seated guilt. She'd insisted on buying a house they could barely afford, leading to financial problems and constant stress. "It was just the one time," she said quietly. "He was drunk and didn't realize what he was doing." Then he apologized for a week. "One time is one more time than should be tolerated," Amy retorted. "And we both know it probably won't be the last time." "Jesus, Sarah, you see how stories like this end every day. Do you really think it's going to be any different with you?" Sarah didn't answer, because there was nothing to say. Toward the end of May, Sarah noticed that her life began to change. At first, slightly. She spent more time at work, staying late after her shift on various excuses. Then little habits that hadn't been there before. She put a password on her phone, something she'd never done before. She checked her email more often. Sometimes she smiled at something when she saw a notification on the screen. Brian Wilson had shown up at the hospital only 3 months ago, a new orderly who had recently moved in from California. Tall, with an open smile and an easygoing personality, he quickly became everyone's favorite. He and Sarah started talking by chance. They found themselves together on a lunch break when everyone else had left. They talked, first about work, then about movies, then about life. Sarah couldn't remember the last time anyone had really been interested in her opinion. Brian listened, really listened. Didn't interrupt, didn't look at his phone, didn't roll his eyes if she said stupid. After that first conversation, they started having regular lunches together. Sometimes other colleagues joined them, but more often it was just the two of them. Sarah kept telling herself that it was just friendship, that she wasn't doing anything wrong, that she deserved at least one person she could be herself around. And yet guilt gnawed at her from the inside out every time Brian texted her, and she smiled as she saw his name on the screen. It was one such evening when Mike caught her texting Brian. She was sitting on the couch with her phone resting on the armrest. The notification came with a distinctive sound. Sarah reached for the phone, but Mike was quicker. "Who's Brian?" he asked, looking at the lock screen where the beginning of the message was visible. "Hi, don't forget our tomorrow." "Colleague," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're working together on a new duty schedule. There's a committee meeting tomorrow." Mike looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to find the lie in her eyes. Then he silently returned the phone and went into the garage, where he spent the rest of the evening. Later, when Mike was already asleep, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The phone vibrated. Another message from Brian. "Good night. Looking forward to our meeting tomorrow. You're making this hospital a much better place." She smiled into the darkness, but immediately heard the creak of floorboards in the hallway. The sound of footsteps were approaching the bedroom. Sarah quickly tucked her phone under her pillow and pretended to be asleep. The door was ajar, and she felt Mike's gaze on her. He stood there for a few seconds and left. Sarah exhaled a breath. Something told her that their lives were about to change forever. June in Oakwood Heights brought sweltering heat and the smell of lime blossoms. Mike Thompson hated this time of year. The humid air that made his old air conditioner in the garage choke and refuse to work properly. The sticky sweat that slowly dripped down his back as he worked under another car. The mosquitoes that attacked him every night in the yard. But this year, something new had been added to the usual summer discomfort. A worm of doubt that was slowly eating him from the inside out. Mike had been sitting in his pickup truck across the street from the hospital for 40 minutes. Sarah's shift should have ended 2 hours ago, but she still hadn't come out. He dialed her number for the third time, voicemail again. "Extra duty," she'd said in the morning, just like 3 days ago, and a week ago. His fingers drummed on the steering wheel. He'd never followed his wife before, considered it beneath his dignity. His father had always said, "A real man either trusts his woman or leaves." But his father had never faced a wife who suddenly put a password on her phone and smiled unbeknownst to him, too. At 23 minutes past 7, Sarah finally appeared at the entrance, but not alone. Walking beside her was a tall man in a blue orderly's uniform. They stopped at a bench in front of the hospital, talking about something. Mike felt his heart start to beat faster when he saw the man lightly touch Sarah's arm. She didn't pull away. Mike knew he should pull up, honk his horn, show that he was here. Show this guy that Sarah had a husband. But something kept him in place. Maybe a desire to see how far this, friendship. Maybe fear of what he might discover. Or maybe the sudden realization that Sarah's attitude toward him had changed, and he needed proof to understand why. 10 minutes later, they said their goodbyes, and the man walked away toward the parking lot, while Sarah walked toward the bus stop. Mike knew she sometimes used the bus if the weather was nice, and she didn't need to be in a hurry. But why today when she was already supposedly running late? He followed the man to the parking lot, remembered his car-used Toyota with a surfer's sticker on the back window. California boy, huh? Mike got home an hour before Sarah, having time to shower and open a bottle of beer in front of the TV like he'd spent the whole evening like that. When she walked in, he didn't even turn his head. "You're late," was all he said. "Told you it was an extra shift," she said, kicking off her shoes in the hallway. "2 patients with complications at the same time. We barely made it through." First lie of the evening. Mike took a sip of beer, hiding a chuckle. I wonder how many more there will be. Over the past 2 weeks, Sarah had noticed that Mike was changing, and not for the better. He used to be predictable in his irritation, angry outbursts followed by apologies or cold silence. Now he was becoming observing, silently, carefully, as if he were gathering evidence. She found him checking her bag. Things weren't laying out the way she'd left them. Noticed that the browser history on their shared computer was regularly cleared, though she didn't do it herself. And one day, coming home earlier than usual because of a canceled meeting, she found him outside their closet going through her things. "Looking for cufflinks," he said then, though the cufflinks were always kept in his own drawer. She began to stay at work more often, sometimes actually taking extra shifts, sometimes just sitting in the cafe across from the hospital, until the time when the extra shift usually ended. She told herself it wasn't cheating, she just needed space to think. But it wasn't the whole truth either. On one such evening, Brian joined her. "You look tired," he said, sitting down with a cup of coffee. "Tough shift?" She shrugged. "More like a rough month." Brian nodded, not demanding an explanation. It was one of his qualities she appreciated. He didn't push, letting her decide how much information she was willing to share. Do you ever feel like your life isn't going at all where you want it to be? She asked, looking out the window at the passing cars. Every single day, he answered, with a slight smile. I think it's called being an adult. She smiled back, but her eyes remained serious. What if you could change course? A fresh start? He sipped his coffee, studying her face thoughtfully. Are you afraid of change or of the consequences? Sarah remained silent, clutching the now cooled cup in her hands. Good question. What scared her more, the idea of leaving Mike or what might happen if he found out about her plans? My sister got divorced last year, Brian said, breaking the pause. The husband was... let's just say he wasn't the nicest man. She was afraid to leave for 5 years, even though I offered to help. Then one day she just packed up and moved in with me. Said she realized one thing: time would pass anyway. A year from now, she'll either be where she is now or somewhere else. The choice is hers. Their gazes met, and Sarah felt a strange calmness. The decision she had subconsciously made but had been afraid to admit suddenly became crystal clear. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? I'm just having coffee with you. He winked. But they both knew that wasn't true. Back home, Sarah found Mike sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop. What are you doing? She asked, feeling her heart start to pound. Checking email, he answered without looking up. The internet isn't working on his. Another lie. Sarah slowly put her bag down, mentally going over what could have been on her computer. Her email was password protected, but she didn't always clear her search history. And there were queries about women's shelters, divorce counseling, apartment rentals. Did you find anything interesting? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Mike finally looked up at her, his eyes a mixture of anger and pain. How long have you been planning this? At that moment, Sarah realized there was no retreat. I wasn't planning it, she answered quietly. Just exploring options. He slammed the laptop shut with such force that she flinched. Options for what? The best way to dump me? Or how to clean out our account before doing so? Mike, it's not like that. How? He stood up, towering over her. How is it, Sarah? Explain it to me because I really don't understand. We've been married for 6 years. I work like hell to provide for you, to give you a home. And what do I get? Divorce lawyers and apartment rentals? Or is it because of that orderly? Are you sleeping with him? Sarah felt something like anger rise up inside, an unfamiliar, almost forgotten feeling. Don't you talk to me like that, she said, surprised at the firmness in her voice. I'm working like hell, too. And don't talk to me about the house. I pay half the mortgage and about Brian. No, I'm not sleeping with him. But you know what? He's the only person I haven't felt guilty around lately just for existing. Mike looked at her with such wonder, as if he were seeing her for the first time. Maybe he was. Sarah hadn't raised her voice at him in a long time. So he is, Mike said quietly after a long pause. You can lie all you want, but I've seen you two together. I've seen the way he looks at you, the way you smile at him. You've never looked at me that way. Sarah felt her strength suddenly leave her. There's no point in proving anything to a man who's already decided what he believes. I'm going away this weekend, she said simply. I'll get a room until we get the house and everything sorted out. You can be angry all you want, but it's settled. She expected another outburst of anger, but Mike just turned silently and walked out of the kitchen. The front door slammed, then the engine of his pickup truck roared to life. The next 2 days passed in a strange truce. Mike hardly ever came home, and when he did, he talked to Sarah only out of necessity. She began to pack her things, putting the essentials in a gym bag that she hid in the trunk of her car. It seemed to her that things were going even better than she had expected. Perhaps Mike, too, had realized that their marriage had worn itself out. Friday evening, Sarah sat at her computer looking at the latest housing options. Amy had offered to let her stay with her, but Sarah didn't want to be a burden and preferred a fresh start. She found a small studio near the hospital, not luxury, but a clean and safe place. The owner promised to show her around tomorrow morning. Her phone vibrated. A WhatsApp message from Brian. Talk to the boss about your transfer. He's okay with it in principle, just need to fill out the paperwork. Can we do it on Monday? I'll be in the office from 9. Sarah smiled. She hadn't told Mike, but one of the reasons she wanted to leave was the possibility of a transfer to another department of the hospital, pediatric oncology, which was always understaffed but where she really felt she was making a difference. Brian, who had connections in administration, offered to help with the transfer. She started typing a reply when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Strangely, she hadn't heard Mike's car pull up. Maybe he had come on foot from the bar around the corner where he often spent evenings with friends. The footsteps were uneven, heavy. He'd definitely been drinking. Sarah hurriedly texted, "Thanks, that's great, I'll be there at 9 on Monday." The bedroom door opened, and Mike stopped in the opening, leaning against the jamb. He smelled of whiskey and cigarettes. "You awake?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "Getting ready," Sarah replied, closing her laptop. "You should too. You're drunk," Mike grinned. "Not as drunk as I'd like to be." He strode into the room, sinking heavily onto the edge of the bed. Sarah tensed. She didn't like it when he was drunk, mostly because she never knew which version of Mike was in front of her. The sentimental one, talking about his love, or the angry one, blaming her for all his problems. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, looking down at the floor. "About us. About what you said. Maybe you're right, and maybe we really should. Take a break." Sarah looked at him in surprise. This was definitely something she hadn't expected. "Really?" He nodded, still not looking at her. "I haven't been a good husband lately. I know that. It's just this debt. The problems at work." He stopped talking, rubbing his forehead. "I don't want to make excuses. I just want you to know that I understand why you want to leave." Something in his voice made Sarah wary. This sudden submissiveness wasn't Mike's style at all. "I'm glad you understand," she said carefully. The phone vibrated again. Mike looked at the screen, and his face changed. "Brian, is it?" he asked, and Sarah noticed the muscles in his jaw tense. "What does he want at this hour?" "It's about work," she replied, feeling the atmosphere in the room change rapidly. "He's helping me with a transfer to another department." "With the transfer," Mike repeated, and something flashed in his eyes. He picked up the phone before Sarah could react. "Let's see what your colleague is doing at 11 o'clock on a Friday night." "Mike, give me the phone," Sarah demanded, standing up. "It's my personal." "Thanks, that's great. I'll be there Monday at 9. He read her last message aloud, then opened the correspondence history, scrolling up. "Talk to the boss about your transfer." "Yeah, definitely a work issue. What's in here?" "Remember, no matter what happens, you have a choice." That's touching advice. "Enough." Sarah tried to snatch the phone, but Mike dismissed her with his free hand. "Now this is interesting," he continued, as if he hadn't heard. "My door is always open to you." Very professional, isn't it? "He meant help with the move," Sarah objected. "He's my friend, and—" "Friend?" Mike finally looked her in the eye, and it took Sarah's breath away. "No, Sarah. Friends don't text at 11 o'clock at night. Friends don't make appointments at the crack of dawn on Monday. Friends don't break up families." Sarah felt anger and fear mingle in her chest. "You destroyed our family long before Brian came along," she said quietly but firmly. "With your hands, your accusations, your control. Look around you, Mike. Look at what our lives have become. We've been unhappy together for a long time, and you're too busy being jealous to notice." Mike looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. For a moment, Sarah thought her words had gotten through, that something like understanding flashed in his eyes. But then the phone in his hand vibrated again. A new message from Brian. "I can't wait. The fact that you decided to take this step is already a victory. Proud of you." Mike slowly put the phone down on the bed. His face became frighteningly calm. "Okay," he said in a low voice. "You've already made up your mind. You're already celebrating your victory. You're getting ready to start a new life. With him." "Mike, But he wasn't listening. He left the room, and Sarah heard his footsteps on the stairs. A few seconds later, the garage door opened and closed downstairs. Sarah stood there, not knowing what to do. Part of her wanted to go after him, to explain that it wasn't what he thought it was, but the other part, the more rational part, said it was better to give him time to cool off. Things would be clearer in the morning. She glanced at the phone. Brian clearly didn't understand the effect his messages were having. She typed a quick reply. "Mike has seen our messages. Very angry. Talk to you tomorrow." Sarah sat down at the computer, intending to finish her apartment search, but she couldn't concentrate. Her thoughts kept returning to Mike's strange calmness before he left. It wasn't like him. Usually his emotions were bright, unconcealed. Something in his eyes made her shudder. She heard the garage door open. Footsteps on the stairs, slow, measured ones this time. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She turned to the door and saw Mike standing in the opening. There was something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Something definitive. That's when she noticed the gun in his hand. "Mike," she exhaled, rising slowly. "What are you doing?" "What I have to do," he answered in a strange, calm voice. "What you expect me to do." I gave up everything for you," he interrupted. "My pride, my dreams, my goddamn life, and you decided to leave anyway." To him. "Mike, listen to me." "No." He shook his head. "I've been listening to you for 6 years, no more." Sarah's phone vibrated again, another message from Brian. Mike shifted his gaze to the screen, and something in his eyes changed. At that moment, the sound of a car pulling up outside was heard. The light from the headlights slid down the walls of the room. Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. Perhaps it was one of the neighbors coming home, or... Mike turned sharply toward the window, his face contorted. "Who's that?" he hissed. "Did you call him? Did he come for you?" What are you talking about? I didn't..." The ringing of the doorbell interrupted her. Mike looked at her with such fury that Sarah involuntarily backed away. He gripped the gun tighter. "Don't move," he ordered, and left the room, heading for the stairs. Sarah stood in a daze for a few seconds, then rushed to the window. An unfamiliar car stood in the driveway. Someone's silhouette was visible at the front door. Muffled voices were heard downstairs, then an argument that turned to shouting. Sarah couldn't make out the words, but the tone was getting more and more hostile. She had to act, run, or intervene. She grabbed her cell phone, ready to dial 911. Suddenly, there was silence. Then the sound of quick footsteps on the stairs. The bedroom door swung open, but the dim lighting made it hard for Sarah to see who was standing in the doorway. "It's over," said a voice, distorted with emotion. Sarah jerked back, bumping into the bedside table. The lamp fell, making the room even darker. The last thing she saw before the deafening gunshot rang out. Detective John Miller arrived on the scene early Saturday morning. The quiet suburb of Oakwood Heights wasn't used to police sirens and yellow tape fencing off neat houses. Neighbors had already gathered in small groups, whispering and watching the police work. Walking up to the bedroom of the Thompson house where Sarah's body had recently lain, Miller looked around carefully. A broken lamp on the floor, a dark stain on the pillow, a bedside table that had been moved. Signs of a struggle or a fall. The gun was found in the bathroom trash can, young Officer Perkins reported. 9mm caliber registered to a Michael Thompson. "Where's the husband now?" Miller asked. "At the precinct, giving a statement. Claims he was working in the garage when he heard the shot. Came up and found his wife dead." Miller went to the window facing the street. "Any neighbors see or hear anything?" Mrs. Garcia across the street says she saw an unfamiliar car outside the Thompson house around midnight. Stood there for a few minutes and drove off. She also heard a loud pop around that time. "Have CSU check all surfaces for prints," Miller ordered, "especially the front door, stair railings, and doorknobs. And get a request for the victim's cell phone records." In the interrogation room, Mike Thompson looked emaciated. Pale face, red eyes, 3-day stubble. He stared blankly at one point while Miller organized the folders on the table. "Mr. Thompson," the detective began, "tell me again about last night." Mike looked up slowly. "I've already told the officers 3 times. Now, repeat it to me." Mike sighed. "I got home around 11 o'clock. Sarah and I had a talk. She said she was leaving me. I went to the garage to cool off, working on the car. About an hour later, I heard a noise upstairs. When I came upstairs, Sarah..." His voice was shaky. "She was already dead." Miller made a note in his notebook. "Did you own a gun, Mr. Thompson?" "Yeah, registered. Kept it in a safe in the garage." "Did anyone know it existed?" Sarah did. I bought it for protection after a string of burglaries in the neighborhood. A neighbor saw a car outside your house around midnight. Did you hear anyone coming? Mike tensed up a little. No, there was music playing in the garage. Did you hear a doorbell or a knock on the door? No. Gunshot residue on your hands, Mr. Thompson. How do you explain that? Mike lowered his eyes. Yeah, I took the gun when I found her. I don't know why, just instinctively. Then I panicked and threw it in the bathroom. Did you and your wife fight a lot? Like any couple, not a big deal. Did she ever threaten to leave before? No, it was unexpected. Miller took a hard look at Mike. Mr. Thompson, your gun was the murder weapon. There was no sign of forced entry. Your wife was shot in the head. And all this happened after she told you she was leaving you. Do you realize what that looks like? Mike looked up, a mixture of fear and despair in his eyes. I didn't kill Sarah, I loved her. At St. Mary's, Miller found Amy Parker, Sarah's friend and colleague. A red-haired woman with tear-stained eyes sat in the break room, staring blankly into space. Miss Parker, Miller began, I'm sorry for your loss. Amy nodded without uttering a word. Did Sarah ever talk about the problems in the marriage? All the time, Amy replied quietly, especially in the last few months. Mike was becoming more and more controlling, checking her cell phone, watching her. One day I noticed bruises on her wrist. She said she hit the door, but I didn't believe her. Was she afraid of her husband? Not explicitly, but, yeah, I think she was. Lately she'd been flinching at sudden noises, always checking to see who was following her. Classic signs. What about Brian Wilson? What was their relationship like? Amy was visibly tense. They were friends. Brian had recently transferred to us and they'd gotten close. He, understood her. Supportive. Was there more than friendship between them? I can't speak for Sarah, but, maybe in time there could have been. She smiled when she talked about him, a real smile. Did Sarah mention plans to leave her husband? Yeah, she was gonna move out this weekend. Found a room, put some money aside. Brian was supposed to help her move. He said he could pick her up anytime if it got dangerous. Do you have Brian Wilson's contacts? Yes. Amy wrote the address and phone number on a piece of paper. He must know about Sarah. Brian Wilson lived in a small but tidy apartment on the edge of town. A tall, athletic-looking man with sleepy eyes answered the door. Mr. Wilson? Detective Miller, Oakwood Heights Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about Sarah Thompson. Brian went pale. Amy called an hour ago. I still can't believe. Come in. In the living room, Miller pulled out a notebook. When was the last time you had contact with Sarah Thompson? Friday night around 11 o'clock. We were messaging. She said her husband saw our messages and got really angry. Then she said she'd talk to you tomorrow. Did you try to contact her after that? Yeah, I sent a couple more messages. I wanted to make sure she was okay. She didn't respond, so I figured. Brian hesitated, then took a deep breath. I decided to go to her place to see if she was okay. I was worried. Miller looked at him carefully. Did you drive to the Thompson house last night? Yes, Brian answered quietly. About midnight, I rang the doorbell. Mike opened the door. And what happened? He was, furious. Said he knew about me and Sarah, that I was destroying their family. I explained that I just wanted to make sure Sarah was okay. He started yelling that she wasn't going anywhere, that she was his wife. I noticed he had a gun in his hand. Did you see Sarah? No, Mike wouldn't let me in the house. When I saw the gun, I realized I was just making things worse by being there. I decided to leave and call the police, but Brian put his hands over his face. I didn't. I thought I was exaggerating the danger, that it was just a domestic dispute. Sarah had never explicitly said she was afraid of physical violence. I decided I would call her again in the morning. It was the worst mistake of my life. Did you hear a gunshot? No, I'd already left. If I had stayed. Miller paused, giving Brian time to collect himself. Where were you after you left the Thompson house? I came home. Been here since about 1:30 in the morning. Can anyone confirm that? No, I live alone. Miller nodded, taking notes. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Wilson. We may need your official statement, and please don't leave town. On the third day of the investigation, new evidence came to light. Forensics found Brian Wilson's fingerprints on the front door of the Thompson house, confirming his visit. They found tire tracks from his car in the driveway. Call detail from Sarah's phone showed active texting with Brian the night of the murder. The last message from her was sent at 11 hours and 45 minutes. Mike is very angry. Talk to you tomorrow. A second search of the house found a hidden camera pointed at the front door in Mike's garage. Technical experts were able to recover some of the recordings that had been intentionally deleted. One of them clearly showed Brian Wilson ringing the doorbell at the Thompson home around midnight and Mike opening the door with a gun in his hand. They argued about something, then Brian left and Mike closed the door and went back into the house. In Sarah's bag, they found a small notebook where she had documented domestic violence incidents with dates and descriptions. The last entry was made 3 days before the murder. M checked phone again, saw messages from B, threatened me, said if I left, he'd find me. Miller called Mike Thompson back in for a second interview. "Mr. Thompson," he began, laying out the photographs and reports on the table. "We've recovered the tapes from the camera in your garage. They clearly show that Brian Wilson came to see you around midnight last night. You claimed no one came." Mike was silent, looking at the still image from the camera where he stood in the doorway with a gun in his hand. "You lied to us, Mr. Thompson. What else in your story is untrue?" Mike took a deep breath. "I didn't want him involved. It doesn't change anything anyway. Let me decide what does and what doesn't. Tell me what really happened on Friday night." Mike was silent for a long time, then began to speak in a low voice. "Sarah and I had a fight. I saw her correspondence with this Brian. She said she was leaving me. I got mad, went to the garage, took the gun out of the safe. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to scare her. I went back to the bedroom. We started arguing again. I showed her the gun. That's when the car pulled up and someone rang the doorbell. What did you do?" I told Sarah not to move and I went to open the door. It was Brian. He said he'd come to make sure Sarah was okay. I figured they had a deal, that she was going to go to him. We had a bet. I showed him the gun and told him to get out. He left. And then? I went back upstairs. I was furious. Sarah was packing a bag. Said she was leaving anyway, with or without my permission. That she couldn't live like this anymore. That Brian had helped her realize she deserved better. Mike took a deep breath. I pointed the gun at her. I just wanted to scare her, but she wasn't scared. Looked me straight in the eye and said, "If you do this, it'll only prove that I was right to leave you." And then she turned her back to me and continued packing, like I was nothing. He covered his face with his hands. I didn't mean to pull the trigger. I swear I didn't mean to. Just something inside broke. Miller nodded slowly. What happened next? I panicked. Dumped the gun in the bathroom. Didn't know what to do. Thought about saying it was Brian, that he'd come back and shot her, or that she did it herself. I wasn't thinking clearly. Miller closed the folder. Mike Thompson, you're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Thompson. A month after Sarah's death, the case was officially closed. Mike Thompson pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence to second-degree murder. He was to spend at least 20 years in prison. On the last day of the investigation, Detective Miller met with Brian Wilson. "You should know that Mike confessed," Miller said. "He shot Sarah right after you left." Brian was silent for a long time, staring past the detective. "I should have stayed," he finally said, "or taken her with me, despite his threats, or at least call the police." "You couldn't have known how it would end," Miller replied. "Even if you had called the police, they probably wouldn't have come right away. Family quarrels aren't a priority unless there's violence. But there was already violence. It's just that no one wanted to notice it, including me." Miller nodded. He knew the statistics all too well. How often domestic violence ended in tragedy. How rarely victims were able to get out on the first try. How the system often failed those who needed protection the most. "She almost made it," Brian said quietly. "A few more minutes and she would have been free." Miller didn't answer. He had nothing to say. Another woman who had almost escaped the trap of an abusive relationship. Another life cut short when freedom seemed so close. Another case in a long list of similar tragedies. The system worked. The killer was found and punished. But that meant nothing to Sarah Thompson.